Hi, everybody. So we are very excited to be here today. We are here to have our next episode of Chicks on Flicks, and we're talking about the film Cinema Paradiso. And Christine is here with me to talk about it.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, and I'm not at 100% voice. I've got some allergies that I'm dealing with today, so you have to excuse that. But it's going to be a lot of fun talking about this uh, classic film and kind of what we thought about it, and see what Roger Ebert also thought about it in his review. So, Christine, what was your initial response to this film?
Uh, Initially, when it started, I thought that it was charming and it was going to be merely charming. I kind of underestimated it. And then the second half, especially when it introduced the love interest, it started really losing me. And I was
Okay.
like, oh, I don't know. And I was feeling very non-compelled. But
Okay.
then as soon as the main character kind of he came back from military service, and then I felt like the entire tone of the movie changed. The message of the movie started coming through, and then I felt like everything started falling into place. And so by the time I was done with this review, because my eyes were all red and everything, and I was just like, it had me in tears by the end. So my reaction to this movie is just like, this was a really good movie.
Yeah. For me, I did go into it with quite a few expectations. I'd heard a lot about it and how great it was, and I thought that it was a very simple movie, but and in some ways it's easy to sort of discount a film like that because it doesn't have a ton of story. But I really just thought it was a very sweet film, and a very nostalgic kind of film. And it's not necessarily, even if you're somebody who doesn't love film, I think that this is a movie that I think you should be able to relate to, about just sort of feeling nostalgic about anything and things that you've lost, things that that were once such a beautiful part of life are gone, and dealing with that. And so I really enjoyed it. I thought it it has a few little things that we'll talk about, but overall I think this is a really sweet, lovely little movie.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things, our favorite things about the film. So basically, the movie, it's about this boy in Italy, in Rome, who loves going to the little cinema in his town, Cinema Paradiso, and he goes and watches the films and gets to know the film projectionist named Alfredo, and he just, he loves these films, and it's sort of about this boy's life and him sort of growing up, and like you said, eventually going off to war and different things like that, and also about sort of the the theater itself and how it changes over the years and everything. Kind of, it almost reminds me a little bit of a movie like Field of Dreams. Of sort of this feeling of kind of sort of looking back on sort of your life and things that you've sort of missed, and sort of this nostalgia of in that case it's baseball, and how baseball connects you to other people, your roots, your family, or whatever. It kind of remind me of that a little bit.
Yeah.
What were some things that really stuck out to you? You said particularly the last half of the movie rang true for you.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, from this movie, the big message that I got was nostalgia is a trap. And that was what Alfredo's, advice to him was for. It was because you know, he goes back, and the thing is not only is that cinema still there, but the people are still there. All the same people are still there. And I think that Alfredo understood the nature of this little town, and he understood that that was what was going to happen to Salvatore if he stayed. And so I thought that this movie wasn't really about movies at all. Not even so. For instance, at the beginning, I was reminded of like Hugo.
Oh, that's a good example. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Hugo to me was absolutely about movies. Like it was I don't even remember the girl's name. You know, it wasn't really about the boy and the girl. It was about movies.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like this movie, it's not about the cinema. It's not about movies. It's about nostalgia, like you said. And anyone who has nostalgia about anything can relate to it. And so I thought that was really beautiful, that it was kind of an exploration of that. And in the beginning and in the middle, I didn't understand a lot of the editing. There were some editorial choices and everything where I was like, I don't understand that cut. I don't really understand the way the story's being told. But then at the end, I felt like the entire time this was being presented to us in a way that's reminiscent of how a memory is remembered. The way you kind of go, hey, remember the time this thing happened? And remember the time this thing happened? And it might seem kind of disjointed, but you put it all together, and it's your overall impression that creates an emotion that you have toward a period of your life.
Yeah.
So I appreciated it by the end, but I didn't understand it just from the get-go.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Because I you know, on one hand, it's like it feels like, why did Alfredo, you know, he didn't want, you know, him to be more a part of each other's lives, you know, like they missed all that time they could have spent together or whatever. But you know, he recognized, I think, what was right for you know, for this particular child, and that he would just get sort of lost in this town, that he wouldn't, you know, do the great things that he was supposed to do. And I don't know, so it is interesting, because it feels like on one hand this movie is a lot about the things that we have lost, but it's also about kind of it's also, it doesn't, I don't know how to explain it, but it's also about, you know, moving forward and kind of just how we have to just kind of, we have to modernize, and we can't I don't know, dwell in the past, live in the past. It reminded me a little bit also of a movie called Midnight in Paris, a little bit. I don't know if you've seen that, but that one is also sort of about nostalgia, and sort of not, the character kind of learns to not to idolize the past, basically. And so, yeah, it was really, really interesting. I think that you do definitely get this feeling of sort of what the community goes through, as well as what the Salvatore, what his life changes, because you see the way the theater kind of evolves and changes, and when it first starts out, you know, the theater is going to the theater is a very community experience. You know, where everybody's like cheering and throwing stuff and freaking out, you know, like very involved, like in the movie. And I think that is something that when we pretty much lost, but every once in a while you'll have an experience, and it is a very powerful experience when it happens. Like for me, when I went and saw Force Awakens the first time, that was a very like community experience where people were dressed up, people were, you know, cheering, people, as soon as the you know thing came up, everyone, oh yeah, you know, it was a very collective community kind of experience. So you get that every now and then, but it's rare, and so I kind of like seeing that evolution of the theater itself throughout the course of the movie.
Well, and I think that one of the things that has been lost is part of the magic of those community experiences I think that those people had that they were portraying in this movie is that it wasn't special, that it was every night, you know, or, and it's almost like childhood. The magic of childhood is that you take it for granted, you know?
Yeah.
So it's right. So it's like when it's lost and you're an adult and you have childlike moments or things that capture your wonder, you appreciate it, but there's something connected to it, right? There's a nostalgia for the way you used to experience it, and you almost miss being able to take it for granted.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Kind of makes me think of in Citizen Kane when the, like he has everything, and the one thing that he thinks of is the last thing that is on his mind is the sled that he played with as a child. The sort of that's the one thing that you can't, no matter how much money, how much anything, you can't ever have that again. And so yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I also think it's interesting to see sort of the moral changes of the town, and through the lens of movies that you see. The very, very first scene of the movie is this priest, censoring the films and holding up. Then I think that's a great scene. And the last scene of the movie is also is also this priest, and so I don't know. It's interesting to kind of, I don't know. It's interesting to think about that, the way that sort of the morals kind of move and change throughout the course of the film.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that when he goes back to Cinema Paradiso, he sees movie posters for erotic movies, and a lot of times, people will start using stuff like that because you have a failing business, and they'll try to use sex to bring business in even more. And I thought that was really interesting that it was suffering so much that those are the last movie posters that stay up in this abandoned building.
Yeah. So. It's true. Yeah, I mean, so Alfredo was like basically cut together all of these scenes that he'd cut out, by the end, and you get this. I don't know. It's just an interesting kind of that what was once sort of censored.
Taboo.
Yeah, censored is now kind of is now been sort of treasured in a way, if that makes sense. And so yeah, it's a I don't know, it's an interesting kind of moment at the end, that last sort of sequence, and that you kind of have to you have to sort of accept sort of the moral code of wherever you are living, but you also have to kind of I don't know, decide for yourself kind of what you believe. Like you kind of have to do both things in a especially in any kind of creative endeavor. So it's interesting. It's also a very a lovingly made movie. I think that the cinematography, the music is beautiful. I think Ennio Morricone is one of the great composers that we have had in movies, and he actually finally 2015 finally won an Oscar, which is crazy. I didn't see it, but he did a movie with Quentin Tarantino called called The Hateful Eight. But he has just beautiful scores. One of my favorites is from the movie The Mission, which I don't know if you'd like it or not, The Mission, but I really like it. But anyway, just beautiful scores, and I think this helps a lot with this movie, is it just captures that sense of sort of nostalgia, and I just thought it was so beautiful, the music. And I thought that it just was very, very, just sort of likable and comforting, and everything in watching it. So one thing that's interesting about this movie is that it was released in 1988, won the best foreign film. And then in 1990, it was released in a 173-minute version. What's interesting is that, and this is supposedly the director's cut, the one that he preferred. But what's interesting is on this is not written by Roger Ebert, but on RogerEbert.com, there's an article that says film improved by butchering. So he goes through, it's pretty interesting. He talks about how this 173-minute version is a much weaker version. So it's more time on the romance. It just doesn't add anything that it sort of it accentuates the weaknesses of the story. And anyway, it was pretty interesting because, I think a lot of times we think that just like studio tampering is like inherently bad. That we should always just like trust the director's vision or whatever. And so here's an interesting example of where I haven't seen this longer version, so who knows, maybe what I would think, but according to this author at least, that it is very much inferior to the 124-minute version. So
interesting.
So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, but Roger, he says that about the movie, he talks about just the experience that it captures of going to a local cinema. He says that the experience of the projection booth and he says, let's see here. Let me find a good quote. He says, I wonder if a theater has ever existed that showed such a variety of films as the Cinema Paradiso does in this movie. Tornatore tells us in an autobiographical note that the theater in his hometown when he was growing up showed everything from Kurosawa to the Hercules movies. And in Cinema Paradiso, we catch glimpses of Charlie Chaplin, John Wayne, and of course countless Hollywood melodramas in which men and women look smolderingly at one another, come closer, seem about to kiss, and then, with the jerk of a jump cut, are standing apart, exchanging a look of deep significance. And so let's see, Texas, the story is told in flashback. It begins with a prominent director learning in Rome that old Alfredo is dead and making a sentimental journey back to his hometown. And let's see here. Yet anyone who loves movies is likely to love Cinema Paradiso, and there is one scene where the projectionist finds that he can reflect the movie out of the window in his booth and out across the town square so that the images can float on a wall. There in the night above the heads of the people, I saw a similar thing happen one night in Venice in 1972 when they showed Chaplin's City of Lights in the Piazza San Marco to more than 10,000 people. And it was then that I realized the same thing this movie argues. Yes, it is tragic that the big screen has been replaced by the little one, but the real shame is that the big screens did not grow even bigger, grow so vast they were finally on the same scale as the movies they were reflecting. So, that's an interesting kind of take that and he also says, we understand that the power of the screen can compensate for deprived life, and the young Salvatore is not apprenticing himself to a projectionist, but to the movies. Once that idea has been established, the film begins to reach for its effects. And so what do you think about that? What he's talking about as far as him being sort of apprenticed to the movies, and sort of the idea that the movies did sort of keep up with life in a way?
I don't know. It would be hard to articulate. I'd have to think about it more too to even decide whether or not I agree with that. Because Alfredo didn't tell Salvatore, go be a film director, follow the movies, throughout your life and be bigger. than this little cinema. I mean, and he left this cinema. He left it behind at Alfredo's advice. I think that his connection to Alfredo was deeper than his connection to the movies. So I don't know if I'd entirely agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I can see that point, that look at it too. That he was kind of that in a certain way, kind of movies sort of raised this boy a little bit, but there was also movies were sort of what bonded him with people, and so and I can feel that definitely in my life, that it's not just about movies, it's about the connection I have with these films with my friends, and and the experiences that we've had talking about Star Wars or Harry Potter or whatever it might be. And so maybe we kind of come around on that in a way. Like when he wrote this, you have to think when he wrote this review, it would have been when things were like VHS was just kind of starting, and when things were really transitioning. Whereas now, I kind of feel like we kind of have both worlds in a way. We have this home experience. We have this like intimate experience as far as it's just us and the screen in a lot of ways. But then we also have the communal experience, and we also have the participatory experience where you bond with people online. There was no internet, in this when he wrote this review, and so I don't know. It's sort of an interesting thing to think about how it's just evolved, and that's sort of a theme of the movie in a way. Is that is both how things change and how things evolve, and also looking back with nostalgia at the way things used to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. And so, in a way, the movies have evolved kind of more than he probably gave him credit for when he wrote this review. So it's an interesting thing. And so, yeah, I think it is really, really well made. I think it is very... I kind of wondered if you would like it as much, because it can be a little self-indulgent at times. And after it's like somebody like me, when they have all of these vignettes from different movies, it's like it's really fun and really a treat. But I didn't know if it would feel a little bit boring for you. So I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it. Okay, well, so let's talk about some of the things that maybe didn't work as well in the movie. I do agree with you that I think the romantic portion is not as effective as the rest of it. I think that is the weak part of the movie. It's just very I don't know. It's very cliched. It's just not that compelling compared to the relationship between Alfredo and Salvatore. It's just not as. It's just kind of meh.
Well, and I thought they had some really good setup where they could have done more with it. For instance, Alfredo tells him the story about the princess who tells the soldier, wait under my window for 100 days and then I'll be yours. And the soldier waits for 99, turns into a husk of a human being. He says he's dry and white. And then on the 99th night, he leaves. And Salvatore's like, wait, why would he do that? And Alfredo's like, I don't know. It's just a dumb story. Well, I thought that they'd come back to it, because then, like, Salvatore says to the girl, oh, I'm going to wait for you every night under your window. And to me, even immediately after Alfredo told the story, the point I got was the man realized any woman who's going to see me suffering out here, every single night, turning into nothing, to dust, has no compassion. And so I don't care how good looking she is. She has zero compassion. And so I'm not interested anymore. I'm just going to stay here for 99 to prove my point. And I'm going to ditch her and find somebody who has a heart. And so I thought that even if the girl doesn't romantically love him, that she would come out when he's withering away under her window and be like, here, have a blanket, or like, come inside, or something to show that she has more to offer other than her pretty blue eyes.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they never did anything with that, I was like, okay. But but then later I was kind of okay with it because she just disappeared. And I liked that because I was like, oh yeah, because sometimes like that happens. You have these flyby romances, and especially back in the day before the internet, where you can't find people if they move and you don't have their new address,
Yeah.
then it's like she just goes away. And I thought that was very true to life. So I thought that was fine. But then if that's all there's going to be to it, then you don't need to spend so much time setting it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it just wasn't, I mean, it's not like it was horrible or anything. It just was kind of bland, I would say.
mm-hmm. Yeah, she just did a lot of like soulful staring.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is especially when you have all of this, like, this romance on screen, it feels a little, it feels like, like it's not as compelling as some of these images, particularly at the end. These images that you see on
right.
screen, it's like,
Yeah.
but and maybe there's something to that. I don't know, but anyway, I agree with you there. Like I said, I do feel like it can be a little indulgent sometimes. With like, I don't think we needed quite as, I enjoyed it because I'm a movie fan, and so it was like a treat for me to see all of these clips of all of these movies. But there probably are there's a lot. There's a lot, and there are people that have a really hard time with this kind of film because there's not a ton of story. There's not a ton that happens in the course of the film. It's just about this kid and his life, and a lot of people want more story, want more plot. I don't have a problem with that, but I know that could be hard for certain people, certain viewers. So
yeah, I thought it was a little overindulgent with some of the symbolism.
Yeah,
there were some that worked really well for me. Like, to me, the very best symbol was the mother getting up to answer the door for Salvatore, who hasn't been around for 30 years, and her knitting unravels.
Oh yeah.
So good. So I loved that moment. I was just like, oh, it's like we're going back in time. Oh, it's so good. But there were some, especially with,
I didn't even think of that, but yeah, you're right.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, so good. But the Catholic symbolism, I thought, was really heavy-handed in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And it was like, we get it, you're Catholic, which is probably how some of those people felt in that town at the time. We get it, we're Catholic. But there were just a lot of like jump shots to the Virgin Mary. And I was like, I like some of these I get, like when there's the fire and he's like, somebody help me. And he like looks at the statue's burning too. I was like, okay, that one works.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I felt like it was excessive. And then they like had a bunch of shots to like the statue of the body of Christ and the people touching it. I'm like, this would be fine if I knew how it related to any of this context. So I felt like that was kind of heavy-handed. Like, it just kept coming in to remind us they're Catholic. I was like, okay, I got it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they're trying to connect it to the priest and to the censorship and to the those kind of things. But yeah, it can be definitely a little heavy-handed for sure. So yeah, there's some issues with the movie, but yeah, overall, I think it really is a strong film, and I really enjoyed watching it. I think it just is the kind of movie that sort of makes you feel good, and is certainly one of the better, I think, movies about movies. So it's no surprise that this won, an Academy Award, because this is like exactly the kind of movie that the Academy, of course, is definitely going to love, because they love movies about making movies.
Yeah. So was this, you mentioned there was an autobiographical note. Was this story autobiographical or was it fictional? I don't know.
I believe it's fictional, but I think it is at least partly based on the director, Giuseppe Tornatore is his name, that it is at least, I think, partly based on his life in growing up in Sicily. It's I was just reading here on Wikipedia. It says this is seen as nostalgic postmodernism. That's a that's a very academic way of describing it. So, it says the film intertwines sentimentality with comedy and nostalgia with pragmaticism. It explores issues of youth, coming of age, and reflections in adulthood about the past. So it says it can be said to reflect Salvatore's idealized memories of his childhood. But it's also a celebration of films. As a projectionist, young Salvatore develops a passion for film that shapes his path. But yeah, I think that it is like loosely based on this guy Tornatore's life, but I don't think it is autobiographical.
So I have a question for you. Since this is fiction, that I was kind of wondering this as I was watching it. You mentioned this is the kind of movie that makes you just feel good. And the thing is I don't know if I feel good because like he sacrificed all of this time. He left this town behind. He followed Alfredo's advice, but it's made very obvious to us that he hasn't found fulfillment or true happiness or love. Why do you think that they would do that? Why don't you think they would write a character who did find those things?
It's an interesting thing. I mean, the nostalgia wouldn't be as powerful then. The looking back wouldn't be as powerful if he was like perfectly content and happy in his current life. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that I don't know. I think it just sort of adds to this feeling of things that we've lost, things that have but I don't know. Like I guess I felt like it made him sort of, it was like an emotionally true kind of moment, and I didn't feel like his life was like horrible or anything like that.
No, it's definitely not.
So I don't know. It's an interesting question. Like, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, there's so many different thoughts. I think that maybe it did feel more true to life for the director to say that, you think you're going to go off and leave everything behind and find everything. You may not. I think I might be a more optimistic person than that. I think it might be a comment too. I think most interesting, the thing that he doesn't have is love, right? And his mother says, like, it's always a different woman who answers the phone when I try to find you. And I can hear in their voices that they don't love you. And I wish that you had found someone to love. And I almost wonder, because what he has with Elena is so obviously not love. It's not. It's just the obsession of youth. It's this idea that in order to get a woman to love you, you have to like wither away out of longing for her, and then she's eventually going to break down. That's so immature. And I wonder if because that's his idea of love, if he falls into this trap of nostalgia and he's like, I just want it to feel like that again. So you're never going to get that.
Yeah.
So maybe that would prevent him from having a real relationship with an adult, woman.
Well, and
they're fixated.
There is an idea oftentimes with art is that art sort of becomes your love. It becomes like that. You see this frequently, I think, in a lot of different films and books and things like that. That you have to kind of, if you want to make like true art, kind of that like you can't kind of have sort of a divided heart, if that makes sense. And so there probably is a little bit of that kind of going on in this film. I had really thought about it that way, to be honest, but I can see that. I can see what you're saying, and it's obviously there is sort of a melancholy in the end of the film. The things that we've sort of lost, and that's probably sort of encapsulated by this film, that we see at the end with all of the cuts and the censorship, of that Alfredo has saved over the years. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Interesting to think about.
That's super interesting you say that, because then that makes me see the Catholic symbols really differently, right? Because, Roger Ebert states like the movies became his mother. Mm-hmm. And so you have interspersed images of the mother of all mothers.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, So, the movies became his, like Alfredo was like the Christ, and the movies were like, his mother. Okay, I'm like, and the Cinema Paradiso was like his God, or his paradise, like his heaven. I don't know. So maybe I'm like, maybe those symbols were lost on me, but not wasted entirely. So that's interesting. I think you're right. And it's interesting too that you say that, because I think it's true. And I think that so much good art is created when people do essentially sell their souls for it.
Yeah.
You make great art when you give your whole life for it. It's not worth it, but it's good art.
Well, I mean, I would say, this is an interesting question, and it's probably somewhat of a tangent, but like, I think about that all the time, that like, you look at somebody like Mozart, let's say Mozart had a pretty unhappy life, but he created this beautiful music. Mm-hmm. Do you say, like, do you say, well, he should have had a happier life, but what if that happier life didn't create this beautiful music? And then the world would be so much lesser, because so it's sort of an interesting thing to sort of think about, that like, well, he kind of we needed that music. It was the worst sacrifice for a human being, but it's like, maybe it is. I don't know. It's because that music is just the greatest, and I don't know. It's interesting.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and as a writer as well, it's a conversation that happens a lot where people are like, "Hey, like we need to be healthy about this. We can't convince ourselves that you have to torture yourself in order to create art." But why is it still a discussion? Why would it be a discussion at all? Because there's this like belief inside all of us. We've seen it, that like a little bit of self-torture does create good art, and even looking back at like great scientists, like stories of, Dmitri Mendeleev, and, who created the periodic table and everything. Yeah. And when I was studying him, there was a conversation he had with his wife, and I'm not sure, I think he was married more than once, so it might have been the lesser love of his life, but she said, it's either science or me. And he said, what are you talking about? Of course it's science. And she stayed. Right. But it's a really interesting thought, and I think that you're right that this movie is touching on some of that, and I hadn't realized that.
Yes, me either. So quite this way. So that's why it's good to have these discussions. I think it's a strong film, and like I said, I think it is very, very well made. I think it like I really do love the music so much, and I just think it is interesting, because like you say, because to me it seems like a warm cup of cocoa, this movie, but there is sort of a darker side to it that is true to it, that he does kind of he doesn't have like the happiest life, but yet it feels very comforting when you watch it. So it's an interesting sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's something about nostalgia that's very comforting.
Right.
But yeah.
Unsettling at the same time.
That's very, very true. which probably makes it powerful, makes it good. But anyway, yeah, so it's an interesting film. So what between like 1 to 10, what grade would you give this movie?
I would give this movie, it's like between a 9 and a 10. Yeah. I would give this movie a 9.5.
Okay. Yeah.
I think this movie is nearly perfect. It is so almost exactly what it should be.
Yeah. I give it a 9, and because it is a very, very lovely little movie. But has a few little things that I would have done differently, but that's the case with everything. So yeah, I think this was a good one. I see why Roger put this on his list, because I do think there is a humanity to this film, and particularly, of course, for him, why he would, as somebody who literally devoted their whole life to movies.
Yeah.
It makes sense why he in particular would think this movie gave you faith in
Yeah,
humanity
absolutely.
in his list. So I'll have a link if you want to check out Roger's list of the films to give you faith in humanity. I'll have a link down in the description section. Check that out. And so let us know if you've seen Cinema Paradiso, what you thought of the movie, if you liked it, if you didn't like it. And thanks so much for joining me to talk about this. This was a lot of fun. This was a movie I'd heard a lot about, but I just hadn't gotten around to seeing. So it was fun to watch it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the exact kind of movie that I was hoping to see, as we were getting into this series. So.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, where can people find you?
People can find me. The best place right now is Instagram at C Tyler Books. I'm doing a bookish giveaway event with one of my friends. It's Harry Potter themed this month. And we have a prompt list. And if people post pictures using the prompt and our hashtag, it's hashtag Tykins Challenge, then they can win a gift box at the end of the month. That's going to be really fun. And on YouTube, I'm youtube.com/CTylerVision. That's the letter C. So.
Cool. Well, great. I'll have that all in the description section. You guys want to check that out. And you can find me at Smiling LDS Girl on all social media. You want to follow us at Chick on Flicks on Twitter. We'll try to keep that updated. And we're going to try to be a little more regular on our podcast. The summer it's just tough in the summer, at least for this fall period. We'll try. And so this week on the channel, on Saturday, we are doing me and Chris over at Germania and David and Larry at LC Screen Talk. The four of us, we are doing our Blockbuster Showdown. We're just finishing up on Twitter, the Showdown, but we're going to hash it out. It's going to be really fun going through a bracket of the greatest blockbusters and figure out which one is the best blockbuster ever. So it'll be a lot of fun. That's coming up on Saturday. And then next week, I'm going to be doing a podcast with my friend Amber, where we're going to be talking about the Love Comes Softly series as part of our Hallmarkies series that we're starting, that we've done. And so that's just some things to look forward to. That should be fun. So, and I will be seeing Home Again tonight, and so you should expect a review tomorrow. So a lot of things to look forward to. So thanks so much for joining me on this, and we will look forward to our next. We're taking a break for the next video. I think the next one we're going to be talking about a animated film called Window Horses. Strange name, but I'm really excited to talk about that with you. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
Yep. All right. Bye.